I thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts, ideas with you. Just to give you some context, for me, as a person working in diocesan ministry, it started many years ago. And when I started, as I would guess with some of you, when you first say that yes to God, you're not quite sure where it's going to lead you. And several years ago, I said yes to working for the Catholic Church, and I thought it would be a Peace Corps job. You know, I'd work for the church for 2 to 3 years and then get real employment. Well, this July, I'll celebrate my 40th anniversary as a diocesan bureaucrat. The bishop I am currently serving is the 7th bishop that I have served in 3 different dioceses. In the Diocese of Green Bay, where I've been for almost 30 years, for the last 25, I have been intimately involved in parish planning, parish renewal, looking at how we can make the best use of the gifts, resources that we have, including our personnel, buildings, time, talent, treasure. It's basically a key stewardship question. In the early 90s, in the Diocese of Green Bay, we had 215 parishes. Today, we have 157. So much of what you have also gone through, we have also, through the years, gone through and been challenged. And you know as well as I, well, let me just ask, how many here have gone through some sort of parish reorganization or restructuring? Just raise your hands. And Oneonta, you can raise your hands too. And thank you, Queensbury. They got it right away. Okay. All right. And how many of you, as you have gone through that, have been confronted with the 7 last words of the church? Does anyone know what those are? Pope Francis himself, in one of his talks, has referenced, that we need to be careful as we move to the future, because we're going to run into the 7 last words of the church. We have always done it that way. Monsignor Jim and Dan talked about change and the fact that it does require us to trust in unique and powerful ways in the Holy Spirit. Because when we do change, we are going to be confronted by those 7 last words. We are also going to be confronted by the cave dwellers. Have you run into do you know about the cave dwellers? These are the Catholics against virtually everything. Now, 1 or 2 of you have run into these people, I can tell by the looks on your faces. But it is a reality if we're going to carry out the mission of the church. We're called to live out that mission. And I want to take just a minute or two, because we have been talking at you, and I would like to get you to talk with us a little more. And this includes Oneonta, Queensbury, as well as here, is that the mission of the church is we arguably most profoundly carried out at a parish, right? So, my question to you, and for the introverts in the group, we'll take a moment of silence so you can gather your thoughts. Why does the parish exist? Why does the parish exist? Now, does everybody have in your mind at least a couple of words, phrases, etc., why the parish exists? Great. Now what I'd like you to do is talk to 1 or 2 people sitting nearby and share why you think the parish exists. Please do that now. Okay, if I could call your attention back, I could easily turn you loose for the next 20 minutes to discuss that. But could I hear some of the responses? And for the people in the back of the room, if you'd come up to the microphone. And for those of you on either side, we have our helpful, wonderful staff with the microphone who's going to come running over to you. But you don't have to give your own answer. You can give the answer of the person you talk to, which will make it easy. Okay, so from Oneonta, what are you giving as an answer?
We come together as a community to strengthen our faith.
Okay, could we try that one more time? The mic came in and out as you were saying it.
We gather as a community.
We need to turn something off here.
Yeah.
No,
I think maybe if you just step a little closer.
Closer to the mic, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
We gather as a community to strengthen our faith.
Okay, great. We gather as a community to strengthen our faith. Thank you. Others?
We think it's important to surround yourselves with other people that share your love of Jesus Christ and the ability to put Him at the center of your life.
All right, good answer. Others? Other answers? Yes, in the back. Could you use the microphone over here?
We mentioned gathering together to nurture our faith and also gathering the Christian community together in order to go forth.
Okay, so gathering the Christian community in order to go forth. Great. Yes?
We're called to be in communion with each other and serving each other.
In communion and serving each other. Great. Okay, we have another person go into the microphone.
To build community in a smaller setting and to offer the Eucharist.
Build community and offer the Eucharist. Yes?
It's also a management geographical factor to the parish that a parish gives to a faith community.
Okay. Management geographic area. At this point, and that's a great one, I'll do a little aside. How many of you here know your parish boundaries? Okay, about half. About half. And same thing with Oneonta. How many of you know your boundaries? Raise those hands so we can see that. Oh, lots. That's great. Most dioceses, Queensbury, I don't want to leave you out. Oh, they all do. That's very impressive. Most dioceses that I talk in, when I ask that question, they all stare at the floor. And, we have this notion of boundary that we're not about boundaries, we're about welcoming. And we are. So it's a negative concept. But for parishes that don't have a sense of boundary, a key part of the mission is to serve every human being within that geographic area, not just those who are registered. And yet that's a trap that a lot of our parishes have fallen into. The community exists to serve the community. Monsignor's question about how you are perceived in that geographic area is critical to the mission. Now, with the mission, and I've done this, I don't know how many different times with different groups. You heard all the different answers we had. Here's a question for you, especially as the Diocesan Pastoral Council and offering your wisdom and experience to the bishop for the mission. Isn't it interesting that we don't have a common understanding of what the mission of the parish is? How effective can most businesses, much less churches or organizations, be if there isn't a common understanding of mission? And believe it or not, there is a correct answer to this, which I'll get to in a second, but I have another question for you. How many here and at our remote sites have a parish mission statement? Okay, looks like at least 85%. How many here or at our remote sites can tell me what it is? Okay, we got a couple. Very good. Why don't you tell us what it is? Here's the microphone.
The mission statement for Immaculate Heart of Mary is that we're there, is to come into community to better serve the community that we exist in.
Okay. And there were a couple of others who could name. Okay, right here.
The mission of St. Patrick's in Athens and Catskill, which is a combined community,
Uh-huh.
is to be a welcoming Catholic community filled with God's enduring love.
Excellent. Okay, we got one more in the back. Could we hear?
This is St. Michael the Archangel in Troy, is a welcoming community that is involved in diverse ministries to assist the people of God.
Okay. Brief and to the point. Excellent. I am shocked. This is the first time in 3 years that I've had 4 people who can name their mission statement. You have done well. In my own diocesan department, we spent 8 months crafting a beautiful, poetic, spiritual work of art called our mission statement. Has anyone else gone through that process? Okay. And 6 weeks after we did it, I went to the staff and said, well, why do we exist? What's our mission? And they all looked at me like I had 2 heads, and they knew 1 or 2 phrases, and so obviously it was not effective. The most effective mission statements are about 6 words, and they can fit on a refrigerator magnet and be displayed in the sacred space of every home on the refrigerator. Okay? So for my diocesan department, our job is to serve parish leaders and to build vibrant parishes. Short, sweet, to the point. Everyone can grasp it. In terms of the mission of the parish, we need also mission statements that reflect the basic teaching of the church and are short, sweet, to the point. One of my favorite ones that one of our parish life coordinators developed with their parish, and they were grappling with multiple words. And she came up with the idea that the mission statement should be to live the gospel whatever it takes. Not bad. Live the gospel whatever it takes. Now, the interesting thing with this particular community is she does the announcements every Sunday. And at the end of Mass, doing the announcements, she always finishes up the announcements with, and remember this week to live the gospel. And the entire community echoes back, whatever it takes. This past Feast of the Assumption, she was doing the announcements, and she forgot. And a 75-year-old woman came charging up saying, aren't we living the gospel anymore? What does the church teach that the parish is about, why it exists? If you want to look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church, section 2179, it's first and foremost to be a community with a pastor as a shepherd, to be a community. Second, to be the place where the Eucharist is celebrated and we learn about the sacraments and celebrate them. 3, it's the place where we learn about Christ's saving doctrine. And 4, it's where Christian charity is practiced. At bare minimum, all of us, pastoral council, parish councils, need to have at least those cornerstones in mind. And especially as we look at the emerging complexity of parish. Because parish, as you and I, many of us grew up in, is evolving, changing, very different. The parish, the church I grew up in, basic principle was pray, pay, and obey. Right? All right? You had the Holy Name Society for the men, the Altar Rosary Society for the women, and pretty much that was it. Now we have multiple structures, opportunities, ways to use all of our gifts. And this is especially challenging when we start to look at multiple parish situations. And I'm going to wander over here so that I can follow along with the slides. So I'm not going to give you the 6-hour presentation. And several just said, oh, thank God. I'm going to give you a little shortened form because I really want to draw on your experience as much as I can. Now, many of you said, and also at our remote sites, that you are in or have been part of a parish transition, part of a parish reorganization, or sharing a pastor now. Again, I would like you to take a minute or two, talk to the person next to you, and if you were going to advise a parish that has not gone through a significant reorganization, what is the key advice that you would give? So again, I'm just going to take you a couple minutes. What advice would you give for parishes that are going through sharing a pastor, reorganization in some form or another?
We'll have a little takeout for you. We have a turkey sandwich and some salad. Okay to go. We can't give you anything to drink because they'll make you throw it out at the airport.
That's right.
So, but anyway, Dan thought that his order would be all right for you. So.
Oh, okay.
You guys have worked together too long.
I know. Okay, again, I could easily turn you loose for the next half hour and process, but could I get a couple of the highlights of advice, just fairly brief, to the point, that you would offer others as they come into sharing a pastor, reorganization, etc. And maybe it would be easy if Oniata, right? Is that close? I'm getting closer. Could you start off, and would somebody share at least one bit of wisdom? And Queensberry, you're next.
We should pray and, very important, be open-minded.
Pray and be very open-minded. Excellent. Thank you. Queensberry, do you have at least one bit of advice?
I think you got to spend a lot of time listening and trying to understand where the people are if you're going to bring them together.
Excellent. So listening, see where the people are before you try to bring them together. All right. Among the Diocesan Pastoral Council or with our guests, advice. Okay, we have one going to the microphone in back. Why don't you go first?
Have a thick skin
Have a thick skin.
and listen respectfully.
Listen respectfully. Excellent.
Especially if they're going to be involving church closures.
Be honest, especially if you're going to be in church closures. Right. Talk straight. Other wisdom. Okay. Nicole is so happy that Dan Ebner joined her so that...
I think that you'll just need a lot of understanding and patience to come together and spend time together figuring out what you want to do.
Absolutely. Understanding and patience. Any other advice? We have some over here from Tony.
the importance of communication with each other and, again, listening to each other and respecting each other's opinions and discussion.
Discussion, listening to each other, respecting each other. It's always amazing to me, we talk about communication, but all too often communication is, I have a message to send to you. That's not communication. It's like the old cartoon of the married couple who were in counseling, and the man is turning to his wife and saying, we wouldn't have a communication problem if she would shut up and listen. It's understanding is the goal. And so, as Dan had mentioned, listening skills are critical, and they can be cultivated and nurtured with some basic training. Other advice? Yes, Sister Judith.
This comes more from my experience in my community.
Yeah.
Is that you have to have the really difficult conversations, and you got to talk about money, because money is reflective of your values.
Correct. Have to have a difficult conversation, and you have to talk about money. I have a story that triggers and will lead into some other things as we talk about multiple parish. I had a situation where we had 2 parishes. We're sharing one pastor. It was very clear that they only needed to use one rectory. And so the question was, building property-wise, what do we do with the other rectory? And my guess is you've confronted or had to deal with these issues yourself. Well, somebody came forward and said, well, why don't we rent the rectory? You know, find a nice family, generate some income for the parish, and life will be good. And the council was, kind of saying, yeah, that's a great idea. And one guy raised his hand. He said, I have a friend who works for the local corrections facility. And they're looking for a place to be a transition halfway house for ex-cons. This rectory would be perfect for it. Can you imagine the energy in the room? And the conversation started to get a little animated. And somebody fortunately had attended one of my workshops where I asked the question, and my colleagues have already talked about the importance of prayer and not doing just bookend prayer. How many of you pray in the middle of meetings? And more than, oh my God. Somebody had the wisdom to say, I think we need to take a spirit break. We need to consult the Master. We need to consider the possibility that in that chair over there for the last 45 minutes, Jesus was sitting. And let's prayerfully consider what advice would Jesus have for us. And you could look at people, and on their faces you could see this, oh no, not the Jesus question. And yet, isn't that the question? You know, as we look at all of this in terms of the mission, what is it that our God is calling us to do and be, as we utilize the resources? And in this particular community, after 2 minutes, they came back, and they knew what Jesus would want. They put in all kinds of safeguards. There was still some fear and trepidation, and they put together a plan of how were they going to share this insight with the rest of the parish. And the beautiful thing about it is that their worst fears never came to be. And it became a source of pride and bonded those communities because they had done something significant and profound. I want to suggest to you that when we look at reorganization of parishes, multiple parish pastoring, it's a time where things are going to be in a little upheaval, where we're going to be invited to drop into the hands of the Lord and discern new possibilities for our community to keep the Catholic faith alive in major areas of our diocese. It's kind of like the old story of the guy who falls off the cliff. and many of you have heard this, where he's swinging on a branch and looks straight down 10,000 feet in death. And he calls out for help. And a cloud comes over. And a voice comes out of the cloud and says, "Let go into my hands." And for a moment, man looks down at death, looks up and says, "Is there anybody else up there who can help?" I want to invite you that as we look at the planning, the dreaming, the possibilities for the future of the Diocese of Albany, that you take the risk of letting go into the hands of the Lord to discern God's will. That really is the task with the bishop, and grounded well in our tradition of the Diocesan Pastoral Council, Parish Pastoral Councils, etc. So let me plow on to the presentation on changing complexity of parishes, and specifically multiple parishes. 27% of the parishes in the United States share a pastor with at least one other parish. Another 7% of the parishes in the United States have been consolidated. And I would suggest these numbers are way too low. It's probably closer to 50% of our parishes. When we look at the, quote, traditional parish, that's one pastor with one more or less homogeneous community. Nationally, it's 61%. In my own Diocese of Green Bay, it's 23%. Okay? So the model of parish that you and I grew up with is really not as existent, and yet it tends to be our frame of reference. So how do we help move beyond that? Now, we did all kinds of research that Monsignor Jim talked about, and one of the things we did was ask people in the pew, how do you view the parish ministries, whether you are in a multiple parish setting or traditional? And we asked them, the liturgies, scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate them? Parish vision, stewardship, faith formation, evangelizing, preparation for the sacraments, youth ministry, faith formation, kids, adults, leadership, parish involvement, intercultural ministry. Now the question for you, for some discussion, of all of these ministries, which ones are done better in a traditional parish? Okay. So, there's a perception of the impact that multiple parish or consolidated parishes have on ministry. So your task is to figure out which of these ministries is done better in a traditional parish. And yes, talk to the person next to you, and we'll see what you come up with for some answers. Which ones? Okay, again, we could spend a lot more time on this, but I just want to prime the pump and get you to think. What do you think? Which ministries are done better in a traditional parish than in a multi-parish setting? Go ahead, I'll repeat what you come up with.
At the risk of getting too far down the road on this question, it occurred to me anyway, in our discussion, that all of these could be done better if you only had one parish to deal with. But we do realize that there are some things that perhaps collaborative work would improve. But it just, I know it's not a trick question, but it does strike me that all of these things would seem to be easier in a traditional parish. Just, saying it.
Yeah, again, this is the evaluation from the person in the pew. Anyone else want to take a shot? Barbara?
Well, our three-person group here said stewardship.
Stewardship. Okay. Oniata, what did you say?
Faith formation for youth.
Faith formation for youth. Okay. Queensberry, what did you come up with?
Liturgies, number one.
Liturgies. Okay. Others here in the group? Any ideas?
What, in Queensbury?
Okay. All right. The answer is, and there is an answer to this, it isn't entirely a trick question, but from the perspective of parishioners, the only ministry that's done better in a traditional parish is intercultural ministry. All the rest, statistically, are evaluated exactly the same. So one thing I want to do, and could spend more time on this, is debunk this myth that, oh, woe is us. How will we ever serve the people? Well, believe it or not, you can do it very well. It does require some different skill sets, some different ways of doing it, but based on a national sample throughout the entire United States, it was only intercultural ministries that statistically showed a significant difference from the perspective of the parishioners. So what about the perspective of, and with this whole thing, the reason I raise it is, what's my attitude going in? Because if your attitude is, oh, this is terrible, awful, there is this phenomena called a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I find that parishioners initially, if they have not gone through some of this previously, go in with this chip. And 9 times out of 10, 12 months, 18 months into it, they say, oh, this isn't as bad as I thought. We still have Mass. It isn't at my favorite time. But, I haven't lost my friends. Most of the key programs, key ministries are here. Now, we may have somebody different who's leading some aspects of it. The pastor is not going to be as present because he is sharing his time. But if it's done well, there's going to be new leadership. In the Diocese of Green Bay, we have a policy that says if you have 2 priests that are serving 2 communities, and now it's going to be 1 priest, this is not the time to rejoice because you can cut the budget with 1 less salary. We have a policy that says that money must go to hiring staff to assist the pastor who's now going to be serving more than 1 community. Now, whether it's a businessman, whether it's a religious faith formation, pastoral care, that is based on some of the gifts and talents of the person. This is where I like to tell my story about Father Gary. In the Diocese of Green Bay, about 10 years ago, in a moment of weakness, the diocese approached Father Gary, and he said yes to being the pastor of 6 parishes. Did everybody hear that loud gasp? And Father Gary came to me and he said, oh, look, you wrote this book on pastoring multiple parishes. You know the techniques. Tell me why did I do this? And I said, well, Father Gary, before we get into the techniques, first question I have for you, what is your gift? What is it in ministry that makes your heart sing? And he looked at me and he said, Mark, don't give me this touchy-feely stuff. I need help. And I said, go with me on this. What is it that makes your heart sing when you have ministry? Now, he was a unique priest in many ways, but he said, the thing that's most life-giving to me is working with youth and young adults. But I gave that up years ago because that's now the DRE's responsibility. And I said, the first thing in structuring this coming together is we're going to make sure there's time and energy for you to work with youth. So Tuesday afternoons were his sacred time to prepare for his youth young adult group on Tuesday nights. He had one of the best in the country. On the other hand, I asked him, what is it in ministry that draws the life right out of you? Anyone want to guess what he said? Raising money, meetings, administration, diocesan reports, supervising, some staff, etc. And we said, well, then the next thing when we bring together the resources from 6 parishes and form a team, we're going to get the best business manager money can buy. And you are going to learn how to delegate, not abdicate responsibility. Okay? Well, by bringing the resources together, he was able to hire a master's degreed person to run the faith formation program. He was able to hire somebody who had an MDiv to do pastoral ministry. He was able to hire a business manager and secretarial support for that team. The ministry in those 6 parishes went up significantly because of the quality of the staff and because of the sharing of resources. Whether it was marriage prep ministry, that now they could recruit and train teams of married couples to do marriage prep, to do baptism prep, the adult faith formation offerings, the faith formation program by coordinating resources and doing joint catechist training. You can go on, but it's possible. It does take some effort, obviously, and a lot of dialogue, discussion, trust, etc. So beware of those self-fulfilling prophecies. Keep the mindset that 1 + 1 does not equal 2, but 1 + 1 = 3. Because now you have to keep in mind Parish A and its unique needs, Parish B and its unique needs, and the relationship and interaction of the two. It's interesting that there was a meeting with priests from Italy with Pope Benedict. And one of them said, "Oh, Holy Father, how can you be a pastor when you have 5 or 6 parishes?" And I love his answer. He said, "We must help your bishops to see clearly how to ensure the parish priest continues to be a pastor and does not become a holy bureaucrat." How many of our pastors have we turned into holy bureaucrats? Interesting when we look at the research between Protestant pastors and Catholic pastors. Protestant pastors spend 14% of their time in meetings and administration. Catholic priests, 31%. What's wrong with that model? And how can we, as lay leaders in our parishes, help our pastors to delegate, to call forth, to utilize other tools and resources so we can use that incredible gift of their spirituality, their ability to teach, to preside at liturgy with enthusiasm and with the Spirit present. Benedict goes on and says, "Furthermore, I think it very important to find the right way to delegate. The priest should be the one who holds the essential reins." And I like that image. You don't abdicate responsibility. You hold on to the reins by supervising, monitoring, make sure there's that feedback loop and touch base. It's a key skill set, as Dan had mentioned earlier, that we need to provide. So migrating from 1 to 2, I noticed that most of you got a copy of my book that I co-authored with Dr. Kate Wiskus, which is a work of art, obviously. And I'm not going to go through those chapters. I'm going to push ahead so that we can. Key thing is that if you know through a planning process that there is a marriage coming, as much as possible, start dating now. Okay? The sooner that you can begin talking about the planning processes and as they unfold, the better off you're going to be. Begin to get to know one another. Share some common projects, shared retreats, training. Consider a pulpit swap so that new pastor who may be coming to your parish from a neighboring parish, the community already knows who that is. Because otherwise they develop these anxieties of not knowing. And of course, the grapevine has all kinds of horrible information. And 9 times out of 10, when they actually meet the person, that anxiety level can drop and drop significantly. 6 to 8 months out, key to find as many opportunities as possible for a transition committee to dialogue, discuss. What's the number one issue that when 2 parishes come together? Mass times. Thank you. Absolutely. You know, yes, we'll be more than happy to share a pastor. Just don't touch our 9 o'clock Mass, right? The other problem we have is that when we do change the Mass time, which means some people who used to go to the 10:30 Mass at their parish now come to your parish, and you find them in your pew, right? Several of you have experienced that. The other kind of key thing is the symbol of where the pastor lives. Okay? If the pastor lives in my parish, you know, and parishes will do that. They'll say, we are willing to share our pastor as long as he lives in our rectory. Because it's a symbol of the viability of the future of the parish. One thing that we do very often is we have the pastor in parish A and parish staff, if they come together, is in parish B. So each has something that's important, and it also provides a place for the pastor to not have to live over the store, and gives them some better space to work. So, transition committee can help with all of that. There's no one way to do this. As you look in the book, you'll see a variety of models. Yeah. The first one is where you have parishes as they now exist, and in the center you can see that little triangle. That's a coordinating committee to begin to look at ways that we can cooperate and collaborate. This is what we call the polite model. As long as everyone's polite and gets along, you can do some things. It can be a challenging model, but it's a good place to start when you know certain clusters of parishes are going to be working together. Model 2 is where you have one pastor, but now you have local leaders that have significant areas of responsibility in that local parish. And that could be a deacon, it could be a full-time paid parish life coordinator. In some of our small-town rural parishes, it's well-trained volunteers who are supervised by the pastor. Third model is where you have one pastor and one coordinating committee, and you don't have a lot of local staff. And now that's a new challenge. Model 4 is one pastor with a centralized team. You notice that now the triangle is much bigger because it's the inter-parish council that's handling most of the consultative advisory role, more so than the individual pastoral councils. Now, in some of our parishes, as a way of transitioning, they may start and have the area pastoral council initially only meet twice a year. But it's at least twice a year a place that the pastor can talk with everybody at once. Another variation on this model that a lot of our parishes use and still maintain individual parish councils is the whole parish councils, all 3 of them, meet in the same place at the same night. Start the meeting off with prayer, some common announcements, usually in dealing with calendar shuffling, and then the 3 pastoral councils move to 3 different corners of the building, and the pastor rotates. So instead of meeting the pastor to death, it's one night, where previously it would have been 3. Model 5 is where you actually merge. It's one pastoral council, one finance council for all three of the churches that are now worship sites. There's still activities at all three of them, but there is a consolidation. And the fifth one is to build a brand new church and close. That's pretty radical. It takes 3 to 5 years on minimum and under ideal circumstances to get to that model. But it is, we've had it at least 3 times in our diocese in the last 15 years. And the sense of pride and energy that emerges when a community can come together is precious. Barbara and I were swapping some stories about that, and one of ours where they took 3 churches, actually 4 were in the mix, created a new church. They were able to blend into the church, the altar from one church, stained glass from another, and Stations of the Cross from another. And in this particular one in Green Bay, as you walk into the church, to the left is the cornerstone. And the cornerstone says, Holy Family Parish, built on the faith foundation, and the names of the 4 parishes underneath it. It's critical that we honor our roots when we look at reorganization, consolidation, and we develop wings. You know, I used to do family ministry, and the challenge was, how do we develop as parents roots and wings? It's the same thing with our parishes. How do we honor those roots and develop those rings? There's a lot of different variables that we can look at if we had a lot more time. We're not going to do that. Pastors, how are they doing with all of this based on the research? Well, believe it or not, 42% are very happy, and at least 51% are fairly happy. 93% is not bad. Again, sometimes the anxiety is greater than the reality is what we have found. And they're appreciated. 64% say they're very much appreciated and affirmed. 32% would say moderately so. So we're doing okay. And you are going to get copies of this whole PowerPoint for some of the sections that I'm about to skip. So, one of the questions that always comes up is, which of these models do you use? And the answer is, it depends. I know, you love those straightforward black and white answers, don't you? Okay? It depends. First of all, you can't force community. You notice the barbed wire down the middle of the church here? And some of you know this experience. I can tell from the looks on your faces. You know, you can't force love. Talk to anybody who's in a blended family about the challenges of bringing 2 families together. There are some, parishes that I linked 15 years ago that are no closer together today than they were 15 years ago. I have other parishes that I've linked within 3 to 5 years. They approach the diocese and say, is it okay if we merge? Right? There are some key variables. One of them obviously is leadership, which is key. But there's also being sensitive to the cultural variables. Change is easy. We can mandate, put out a decree, do whatever. Transition takes a lot more time and patience, the things of the heart and soul that are literally handed down generation to generation. I was out west doing a workshop, and to give you an idea of the respect for culture, this one pastor had 2 parishes, and it was a mining town. Mines closed down 70 years ago. And he said, I had the most awful time getting these 2 parishes 6 blocks apart from each other from cooperating. Until somebody, after 2 years, explained to me that St. Mary's was the church built by miners, and St. Joe's was built by the mine owners. And subconsciously, generation to generation, the animosity was handed on in subtle ways. In my own diocese, it's the difference between the Irish and the Germans. Much less our expanding Hispanic community, as you have experienced, I'm sure. The respect for those cultures. How do we do that, but then maintain the bigger unity of the church? So, each parish has a unique culture. Respect it. Which vision? What's the likelihood of collaboration? Is it great? Is it moderate? Unlikely? Not sure. We recommend that you do a cultural exegesis. Isn't that a cool word? Cultural exegesis. Compatibility. What's the ethnic roots of the parish? We have the Irish and the Germans. We have the situation in one of our cities, 4 blocks between the 2 parishes. One was a German parish, and when the Irish arrived, they wanted to have a statue of St. Patrick in the parish, and the Germans said absolutely not. So they went 4 blocks away and built the Irish church. To this day, they talk about when you walk down the street and you saw somebody from St. Mary's, you walk to the other side of the street. And we have those things deeply rooted within us. Not that they're insurmountable. Ecclesial identity. Downtown Green Bay, one of the things we have is our cathedral doesn't have its own pastor. It's shared with another church 3 blocks away. Now, the cathedral is the cathedral in its majesty and tradition and very solid community. 3 blocks away is St. John the Evangelist, and it is the social justice parish of the diocese. They took their school several years ago, turned it into a homeless shelter. They have done an active outreach to the deaf and hard of hearing community, and the pastor spent many years trying to get them to be one. It didn't work. And when he let go of some of that, the cooperation and collaboration was wonderful, but they were affirmed in their unique identities and gifts. Relative size, if you have a very large parish linking with a smaller one, what's the position of the smaller one? You're not going to gobble us up. And they circle the wagon. So how do you respect that? Economic health. I had 2 parishes. One parish had the pastor's pride and joy was a 33-minute liturgy. He also had a small religious ed program, 1,000 families, no staff, because there was no need for any. There was nothing else going on. We were linking them with a parish that was a full-service parish with staff, Catholic school, who just barely made their budget each year. Can you imagine the dynamics in bringing them together? I remember as we were having conversations suggesting to the linking committee that there is this scripture passage that says, if you have 2 coats and your neighbor has none, you should share. At which point a gentleman rocketed up his hand and he said, don't give us that church talk, we're talking about money now. Right? Well, money is in one of the gifts that God gives us to use for the mission. Money isn't the mission. And we have to keep that in perspective. Geography. We have a river that goes through the center of Green Bay. People on the east side don't shop, much less go to a meeting on the west side and vice versa, even though it would be all of a 12-minute drive. Okay? You know some of those. The relational history, every one of our small towns has, pretty many of them at least, have a high school and a high school football team that just thrives on beating up the neighboring community. They're not going to come together quickly and easily unless there's a lot of prayer, discussion, dialogue. Decision-making, priorities, staffs, how parishioners are involved, tolerance for change. How much have you been through or not? Parish viability, telling the community stories. There's so many other variables that we need to take into place. Keep in mind the bigger mission, which which is to build community. And the best way to build community is by building relationships. And the relationships that are most helpful are the ones where you have success in projects. How do you limit the ability to bring communities together? Announce that you're going to try to consolidate them, because it immediately puts up people's barriers. Instead, hunt for the projects where you can have modest success. An example, in our diocese, one of my responsibilities is 2 parishes in the Dominican Republic on the border with Haiti. Those 2 parishes serve 90 small Christian communities scattered through the hills. The project that we came up with was to build small chapels in every one of those 90s. In order to do that, it takes about $7,000. Not an insurmountable chunk of money, but what has happened is that the communities coming together begin to work together to raise those funds, and the sense of accomplishment and pride that comes with that local community in the Dominican Republic, from the chapel that they build, and the pride that the communities feel, that's what builds relationship. And so the secret is, how do we find those projects that we can work on together so that collaboration or coming together comes naturally? One pastor a couple months ago that I spoke with said when he was assigned to 2 parishes, the first thing he announced was that as long as he was pastor, St. Joseph's and St. Mary's would always exist, and that he would fight tooth and nail to make it so. That being said, the only thing he expected is that while they'll both exist, I expect you to cooperate and collaborate with each other. But because he had dropped the major fear, the level of cooperation and collaboration grew over several years to the extent that he thinks they might be ready in another year or 2 to look at the possibility of consolidation and coming together even closer. But it's because of several years of building relationship and trusting one another. Much more could and should be said, and with the handout that you're going to get, right, of the slides that I've shared with you, you'll have a chance to see other points. And thank you very much for reading the book and for your kind attention. And may God be with you as you plan as a diocese for the future and assist your bishop. Thank you. Yeah, we've got 10 minutes left, and first of all, take 1 minute and just with everything you heard from Dan, Monsignor, and myself, what's the 1 or 2 things that is just sticking in your mind? And if you would share that for just a couple of minutes, and then if there are any questions you have for the 3 of us, we've got at least a couple minutes that we can entertain a few of those. questions. We've only got about 7 minutes, but I want to at least mine a few of those anyway. Let me ask with Queensberry, any questions or observations?
Not so much a question, but the observation is we need to continue to talk about this because there are problems and issues that confront the North Country that do not confront like the city.
Okay.
The population grows during the summer with the tourist industry. We have poor communities and lack of resources. And how do we actually manage all of this, given the fluctuation with the population and the distances between the churches? So we need to continue to talk about these issues in another whole area.
Excellent. I think that came through loud and clear, so I don't need to repeat it, but an excellent insight that every area is going to be unique. In my own diocese, we have a tourist area, which off-season, they have 5 worship sites, and they shut down 1 church a month off-season, when in season with the tourists, there's 12 masses on a weekend. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah. Oneata, is that close? Do you have any?
Okay. We lost the sound.
No, we got.
You're on.
Yeah, I think they're waiting for us to respond.
Okay. Here in the group, from the DPC or our audience, any comments or questions that or observations that you'd like to make? Yes, get the microphone.
This came up in a offline conversation. Do you, in your diocese yet, or are you aware of dioceses that you may have consulted with, have they gone to a Monday Mass schedule in some places where you might have a multiple parish arrangement that has Masses, of course, on Saturday and on Sunday, but now on Monday? I just throw it out as a...
Yeah, the question, just to repeat it, is do we have in a multi-parish situation any situations where they have a Mass on a Monday? And my answer to that is that we have one situation where the community came to the pastor and said, could we just have, for them it was a Tuesday night. And the pastor said, well, that will not meet the requirements of church teaching, but if I see you at the neighboring church on Sunday consistently, I will do a Tuesday night Mass. And his initial frame of reference was, well, I'll do that for 6 months and the community will dissipate and then we can phase it out. It took him 5 years before he could do that. But he did see the community on Sunday, but they also enjoyed that special time on Tuesday night to gather. So kind of a midpoint of what you're suggesting.
Just a clarification. I'm talking about a canonically approved, in other words, a dispensation to fulfill the obligation on a Monday. There are apparently dioceses that we won't name that do have that. I was just curious if it had come to your attention.
It's possible.
There doesn't have to be an answer. It's just a question.
Yeah, but it's not real common. And it takes what's called an indult, which is not an easy thing to secure. Okay, other questions, comments? If not, then, okay, we got one coming.
I didn't get all the handouts for the presentation were gone, so I didn't have one. My husband's got one, but that's okay. It seems to me that the models that you showed us were all predicated on the pastor being the central person. Does that necessarily have to be a priest?
In order for it to be a parish, there has to be a pastor, canonical pastor, in the mix. But as you have parish life coordinators, as we do in the Diocese of Green Bay. We have 17 of them that serve something like 24 parishes. So we even have parish life coordinators that handle everything except the
saying
sacraments.
Mass,
Okay.
And in some instances, they're responsible for 2 or more parishes as well, and have been very effective in maintaining the spirit and life of those communities.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So, with that, obviously there's much more that could and should be said at some point. I want to thank you. Thank you in Queensberry and Oneonta.
Oneonta, good.
And I also want to thank you and also just have a couple of housekeeping issues. First of all, when Mark, for his area, when he was referring to the season where population increases in his area, it begins in September and it ends in January. He's from Green Bay, so anyway, he may not be able to pronounce Oneonta, but I guess he feels that he has a football team that doesn't make a difference with. You can say Lambeau Field. Yes. We have a couple of books, and I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is we have them. This is a Pastoring Multiple Parishes. This is by Mark Mogilka and Kate Wiskus, and that had been given out to the DPC, but it is available for $11, and you can see Rosalind in the back. So the good news is it's available. The bad news is it's $11. The good news is Blessing for Leaders is available. The bad news is it's $7. So anyway, if you want either of those, please see Rosalind in the back. She will help you with that. I would also like to extend thanks to Father Bush and the group that he has called together at Annunciation, and also to Father Miskevich and the group that he has called together in Oneonta, and all of the folks here. So maybe we can just kind of give those folks and our folks kind of a nice round of applause. I want to give special recognition also to Viking Video, who really came together probably in about the last 3 weeks as we realized we were going to be able to do this. This is why it was such a late notice. There was a number of steps that we had to get to when we really weren't sure until after Christmas that we were going to be able to fully pull this off. So I want to thank them for the work that they have done for us in the last 3 weeks. And I want, again, to know that the presentations that Dan and that Mark and that Monsignor Jim have done, we have the PowerPoints. They will be on the website. They will also be available to you if, in fact, you want hard copies, if for some reason we had run out. So they will be available to you, and perhaps with me, can we give our presenters a nice round of applause? And finally, my partner in pulling this video conferencing piece off was the entire ID department, which is headed by Geraldine Fox, and just a tremendous amount of work that she has done and her department has done to help us shrink our diocese. So the presentations that are done not only here but in these remote locations can be seen throughout our diocese. Our goal is to have at least 3 more sites, and there'll be more of that coming out in the future. But we have benefited significantly from the research that Jerry has done to find out how we can do this cost effectively, and I certainly want to recognize her and her entire department. And I think that's it. So as they say, it's a wrap. So. Okay, thank you very much. Oops, wait a minute, there is a question. Okay, we're going to, refer everybody to the sites if you want. We'll do the closing prayer, and then we'll be closed out.
Give that
We've heard a lot of things. Our minds, we've been in a lot of places. Perhaps we can take a moment and just quiet ourselves. And let us say together, "Come, O life-giving Spirit, transform us.